You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. You wanted it, you got it. A radio program that helps teach you options trading inside and out, basic to complex. This is Options Bootcamp. Whether you want to learn how to protect your portfolio, generate income, or even become a master of volatility, the Options Bootcamp drill instructors will break it all down for you. Now, let's get you into peak options trading shape. Here are your Options Bootcamp drill instructors.
All right, everybody. Welcome to this special holiday edition of Options Bootcamp. Dan and I are off getting ready to stuff our faces with turkey, but we didn't want to leave you empty-handed here on Options Bootcamp. We know there's stuff going on every day. You guys have questions. We see it. We've been off for a few weeks from live, and you guys have filled our mailbag to the brim. This show gets so much feedback, so much love. We appreciate all of you who take the time to write in with your questions. We endeavored to answer as many as we possibly can. Keep them coming in via all the different platforms, social media, the website, questions at theoptionsinsider.com. A lot of you guys who can join us in the pro get bumped to the top of the list. You also get to listen to the show live. You get to listen to this a week early. Get your questions answered a week early, which is always fun. The rest of you have to wait until the day before Turkey Day to get access to this one. Of course, if you want to join the pro folks, you know where to go for all that good stuff and a whole bunch more exclusive shows, chances to win these awesome Pro Trader crates, which are costing me an arm and a leg to ship out to you folks. But we like you folks. We don't mind doing it. Theoptionsinsider.com/pro is the place to go to join the fun crazies we got lurking in there. And they're a fun bunch. And of course, however you listen live after the fact, keep those questions coming. You guys don't need my prompting for this show, but still, we do love to hear from all of you folks out there. Let's see who we're hearing from on the good old program today. We're going back out to the far southern hinterlands of Chicago. He's almost a Hoosier at this point, listeners, where we are joined by none other than Mr. Dan P., a.k.a. the founder of Market Taker Mentoring, a.k.a. a.k.a. the author of one or two or half a dozen options-oriented tomes. Mr. P., welcome back to the program. Are you getting ready to feast on your turkey, sir?
I am. I'm hungry already. We're having Thanksgiving at our house this year, and I love doing that because I make a mean turkey. Got to have nice crispy skin, but still moist, juicy breast meat. It's a challenge, but you know.
It is a challenge. How do you cook it? Are you a fryer? Are you a smoker? Are you an oven guy? What do you do?
I'm a traditionalist oven guy, although to be fair, I have had some of the deep fried turkeys, and those do turn out really, really good. But I don't know. I got enough crazy hobbies. I feel like that's yet another hobby.
I went above and beyond last year. I did the whole brining and all this stuff, and then I smoked the turkey. And that was that was like a whole, 2-day process. You had to brine it for like a 24 hour. You had to get up in the middle of the night to like flip it. It's all kinds of weirdness. It came out good. It was flavorful, and the smoking was nice. I think I probably will use the smoker again this year and do it that way because it adds a nice flavor to it. I don't know if the brining may just be a step too far. That's a lot I got a whole big cooler. You got to make this brine. You got to rotate it. It's crazy. It's like a science experiment. You got enough going on the hot. Speaking of which, since we're on our holiday one, and we got a very important question coming in from the live chat right now. Actually came in on our last episode. It's from Mr. Unlimited there in the chat. He says, if this is the Thanksgiving episode, which this one is now, he says, I must know what the best Thanksgiving side dish is. Dan, there are many choices. You have I don't know if cranberry sauce is really a side. It's more of a topping. But you got your potatoes, you got your mashed, you got your sweet, you got your stuffing, all kinds of things. What do you go for on a Thanksgiving, sir?
For me, well, I've got two favorites. One, and I am a very traditionalist when it comes to Thanksgiving. Every once in a while, I'll make something like a little fancy. But some good old-fashioned homemade stuffing is just the best part of the Thanksgiving meal. Now, my second favorite side is Kathleen makes this like green bean casserole. And it's totally traditional, old school, the kind with the mushroom soup and like the French's fried onions on top of it. That's my second favorite.
You know, I'm with you. I have rediscovered the traditional stuffing. We kind of didn't do it because it seemed kind of boring, but I've kind of been jazzing it up. I've been making the Italian style stuffing, Mr. Dan, which is you take, the stuffing, you cook it normally. You got to cook it with broth, not with water. That's the first thing you got to do. You got to use the broth to add the flavor. But then I go above and beyond, Dan, and I take a bunch of nice Italian sausage. I saute it with garlic and oil and some onions and a bunch of other seasonings in there. So I saute all this crumbled sausage, and then you mix it in with the stuffing. It is almost like a meal unto itself. I dare I say it, that is the best thing on the table every year. It's amazing. You should do it. You should try it, sir.
Man, that does sound really good. My parents used to make it that way. My mouth would be watering had I not just had a big, gigantic bowl of leftover chicken cacciatore where I gorged myself on.
Yeah, I grew up that way as well. That's kind of the Italian way to make the stuffing, right? You always have to have sausage or something in it. So that's kind of the way I grew up with it, too. I have rediscovered it now. So I might have to go with that, Mr. Unlimited. My newly rediscovered Italian flavor of sausage. You got to go with the broth. You got to go with crumbled sausage so you can spread it and distribute it amongst the stuffing. And then you have to have a bunch of seasonings you mix in there, saute it, maybe some onions and other things. I remember I used to put olives, I think, in ours growing up. I like olives, but other people don't, so that's maybe a hit or miss for you. But yeah, that's probably my favorite side. And since we're talking your questions and stuff anyway, let's get to it. Let's make it official. It is time for the mail call.
Mail call. Time to look at questions submitted by our listeners.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the mail call, the portion of the show where you folks take the reins, your questions, your comments. Mr. Dan, we got a ton of them here, so I don't mind plowing into all these, but I don't want to shortchange your members either over there at MTM. So if you've received any interesting or intriguing or maybe just plain head-scratching questions since our last show you want to share with our listeners, now is the time, sir. The floor is yours.
Yeah, Mark, I send out these videos 3 to 5 times a week to just the people who are, in the family, subscribe to our mailing list. And it's wonderful working with one-on-one coaching students because they give me fodder for these videos. And I was working with a guy yesterday, and he was like, man, I really want to understand vertical spreads better. And so I said, you know what? And I put out a video on it. For those of you who are not on our mailing list yet, go over to markettaker.com, just click join free, and you'll get these videos 3 to 5 times a week too. But, as far as credit spreads is what I really narrowed in on. The secret to those is, there are some nuances to them, but the easiest thing is to think of it as, hey, I don't want the stock to go through this strike. And so I'm going to use support or resistance to set my short strike at that point or just a little past that point. And, the stronger your support or resistance, support for put credit spreads, resistance for call credit spreads, the better. And then we also want to look and see that implied volatility is at least fair valued, if not slightly elevated. And that's the biggest part of the recipe right there.
That's your recipe, listeners. Let's see what recipes you guys have in store for us outside of our favorite Thanksgiving sides, which we could talk about for hours. Let's go out to Jeff Davis. That name sounds familiar. I don't think he's written in a little bit. Jeff says, hello again, Mark and Daniel. He says, I've been looking at an energy stock that IPO'd about a month ago, and they still don't have an options chain in place. I remember Lyft and Uber both got chains on them about 3 business days after they IPO'd. This leads me to ask, what criteria are used to add an options chain to a security? Is there a place to view a schedule of upcoming options chain initializations And does the company have any say in whether they get an option chain placed on their stock? Thanks, Jeff. Well, Jeff, a lot of questions there. We'll take them in order. Yeah, you're talking about, this is a hot topic. I just said recently, the BIDO options on the ProShares ETF. That to me is the fastest turnaround I've ever seen. It was definitely within 48 hours. It might have even been within 24. I'll have to go back and check, which is, again, that's historically fast. I've never seen a name get listed that quickly. Usually back in the old days, it would be about a month or two. And then in recent history, it'd be probably it was a couple of weeks, and they got it down to about a week. And that seemed pretty fast. To do it in about a day or two is historic. But that was a historic launch. We saw it getting to $1 billion AUM faster than anything since GLD back in, I think it was 2002. Huge amount of interest in that name. So you can see why. And that's what tends to spark it a lot these days. There are official criteria. I'll get to that in a second. But what really seems to be the catalyst, it's got to be like a BIDO or a Rivian or some of these other ones that are super hot, right? Everybody's got interest in them. Then guess what? The exchanges want to list them because they're for-profit public companies. They want volume. So they'll agitate and get those listed faster than, let's say, you don't say what stock it is, but whatever maybe second or third tier energy stock it is you're talking about. But there are criteria. If you go over to OCC, they list them for you. And if you did so, I'll read them off for you. You can find these for yourselves, listeners, over there at the Options Clearing Corp. OIC has them listed there as well, which is their educational arm, Options Industry Council. And you will see that there are pretty much 5 criteria they list here. One of them, though, seems to have fallen by the wayside. I'll get to that in a second. They say, first off, a national stock exchange in accordance with the National Market System, NMS, must list the underlying security. Your thing has IPO'd, so that has happened. Second one, the underlying has to have a minimum price of $3 per share for 5 consecutive trading days prior to listing. I don't know where your underlying is trading, so I don't know if it meets that criteria or not. 3, there are at least 7 million publicly held shares outstanding, excluding shares held by directors or holders of 10% or more of the underlying equity shares. So it's saying the actual public float has to be at least 7 million shares. And that could also be what's tripping up your underlying. A lot of stocks don't have that many shares outstanding. And then also number 4, there have to be at least 2,000 shareholders. So it can't be a thing that's only owned by a couple of directors and a handful of others. It's got to have 2,000 shareholders. That could be another thing that's tripping up your underlying. And then the last criteria they mentioned is the one I've said has kind of fallen by the wayside, which is generally there would be a minimum of 5 trading days from the IPO date before listing options on any stock. But meeting these criteria alone will not guarantee listing. So as you could tell, that last one has kind of been changed a little bit in this era of hot IPOs. Everybody wants to trade hot things now. The exchanges want to make money. OCC wants the exchanges to make money. So they're going to do what the exchanges want. They are a member organization of the exchanges at the end of the day. They're member owned by the exchanges. So if there's a hot name like a BIDO or a Rivian, they're going to work really hard and fast behind the scenes to have that ready to go versus, let's say, whatever energy IPO. You should buy a check, see if it meets any of these criteria. And if it does and it still hasn't been listed, then I don't know. Maybe that might be an interesting one to hit them up about. Dan, oh, by the way, your other one, what was the other question about? Is there a place to view a schedule? Yes, if you go to, not a schedule of upcoming, but you can see what they've added recently because they don't really open the kimono on the other stuff too often. If you go to search for OCC and new listings, they have it broken down by month and you could go download it there. That's going to show you what has been listed, not what is coming. If you want that, if you go look at maybe some IPO calendars, that'll give you a hint of what's probably coming. But that's not, obviously nothing's guaranteed there. Dan, anything to add there on when options are added to a stock after an IPO, sir?
Yeah, there's 2 things. One is he asked, does the company have any say in whether they get an options chain placed on their stock? And that answer is definitely no. The exchanges that list this, they're a third-party organization. The company doesn't have a say-so either way. And Dan said, this used to be the case. Now, I don't want to be sending anybody off on a wild goose chase or anything here, but it used to be the case a long time ago where if you were a trader that, maybe traded big enough, and what that means, I don't know, but big enough, you could literally call the exchange and say, hey, you know what? Look, I really want to trade this. I'm going to be trading a lot of it. Would you list it? And back in the day, they used to. So it's worth a shot. The worst thing that can happen is they say, what are you talking about? Beat it. And So I don't know. You can try that.
We used to see that a lot with strikes. People would call up, you say, hey, we want to add new strikes to this name, and that would usually work. Getting a new whole thing listed, that'd be funny if Joe Tenlot called up the SIBO and says, hey, we want to, and they say, hey, well, why not? What's the worst that could happen, right? They just say no and hang up in your face, and they laugh hysterically afterward. But yeah, we have some good success with that on adding strikes. Maybe you want to call up Dan and ask to add some strikes on Prague. Maybe you should. Yeah, interesting stuff. And whether companies want, list options, why wouldn't they? That just adds more volume back into their stock at the end of the day, more liquidity. That's usually a good thing. I have a hard time thinking of when a company wouldn't want options, but you never know. Let's go on out to next question here from Max. Max wants to know, where do you get the options volume numbers that you report on the network every month? Thanks and love the shows. Well, we get those in the same place. Our friends over there at OCC, they crunch the numbers because they clear everything and they send them to us at the beginning of every month. But you don't need to be special to get these numbers. We get them directly, but you can get them yourselves as well. They put out press releases on this every month. They like beating that drum, as you might imagine, because it's been a pretty good year for options volume. And they like letting these numbers be known far and wide. They want a lot of the media outlets to talk about them. That's why they send them to us. They send them out to Bloomberg and the Journal and everybody else. But you can go to the website and see it for yourself and the press releases and everything else. And you'll see the numbers. They just came out for October not too long ago. It was the highest volume October in the history of the business. 825.5 million contracts cleared in October, which is a ridiculous number. And even more ridiculous, Dan, remember we were talking about how crazily active last year was, 2020. It was a ridiculous amount of volume, 7.52 billion contracts, a ridiculous amount of volume. No one thought we would get there with the options business, certainly not this soon, maybe sometime far in the distant future, but no one thought that was a reachable, viable goal anytime soon. We hit it last year. No one thought this year would be able to touch it. Dan, they beat that already last month. They exceeded the total record volume created in the whole of 2020 already by about mid-October. They hit total volume this year, 8.1 billion contracts through the end of October already. So, Dan, how crazy is that? They've already beaten the insane year of 2020 by mid-October. The rest is just gravy, Dan.
Jeez, man. You know what? That's great news for everybody. I mean, I tell people all the time, like, look, listed options levels the playing field between the Wall Street folks and the Main Street folks. You have the same access to everything that the big hedge funds have access to, including information and including the exact same markets. So I just think it's wonderful that the volume is up so much.
Yeah, I mean, a rising tide lifts all boats. Someone was on our network recently, and they were joking that, we wanted more people to join the options market. We didn't know they would all join at the same time. But they did. Like, these numbers are insane. And hey, we love it. We love more people. We see the numbers in the show like Options Bootcamp. This speaks directly to that audience, the new options audience. And it's been off the charts. And we love all of you out there. Hopefully you're staying safe with your trading. Hopefully you're making some good money out there. And a show like this is helping you. And we're trying, again, you guys hit us up with so many questions. We're trying to keep clearing out the mailbag so you can send us more. Like this next one. We get a lot of interesting requests on this show, Dan. This is an interesting one as well. This comes from Jack Allwile. He says, love the show, guys. My brother and I run a podcast. It's called the Brothers on Books podcast. We are going to be reading Dynamic Hedging by Taleb and discuss it in April. They're planning far ahead of time. They were wondering if either of us would like to read it and or discuss some of the concepts on their show. Well, Jack, we get a lot of these kind of requests to come on other things. We're kind of busy here doing our own content. But I think you caught me on a good day. It's coming into the holidays. Everyone's celebratory. So tell you what, I will come on your show next April to discuss Taleb. I can't speak for Dan, though. He's a bit of a curmudgeon. You might have had a better shot with Dan if you actually wanted to read one of his books. What do you think, Dan?
Well, that would be great, too. I'd be happy to discuss that.
Have you read Taleb?
I've read The Black Swan. That's the only one I read.
Yeah, that's the one everyone's read. I've read that one, too. That's kind of like, that's where he created his brand around. I would have maybe suggested for them, maybe as their starter book, probably more of the Natenberg, Option Volatility and Pricing. Kind of dry, but it is still the Bible. Would you agree, Dan? Obviously outside of what you have written, sir.
Yeah, 100%. It's frankly, I think it's the only options book I ever read. But
which of yours would you recommend for the newcomer, sir?
I'd probably recommend Trading Option Greeks. I just think it's most practical. It's just packed full of extremely practical information.
So there you go, Jack, on your brother's books. I'll come on it. Maybe I'll see if I can drag Dan on. Next April, you guys give us a lot of warning. That was nice. Hopefully your podcast is going. I'll have to check it out. I haven't listened to it. I'll have to see what other books you're talking about on there. But I'm glad to see you're including options in there. I'll discuss some other ones you maybe want to look at there on the show as well. I'm looking forward to it. Should be fun. All right, let's move on here to, here's an interesting kind of theoretical one maybe to close us out here for the holiday, Dan. We've got Nisa. Nisa says, I have a curious question for the pros. What is your biggest trading regret? Well, I guess there's the obvious one of not buying Bitcoin when it was a fraction of a cent. That's probably a big one, Dan. But outside of that one, what would you say, Dan? I'll let you have the joy of going first on this one. What is your biggest trading regret, sir?
Oh man, yeah, the Bitcoin one. That's one. I sure didn't take advantage of the Y2K thing like I should have. That's one. And then the other one, which we could do a whole show on this. I don't want to get too in the weeds on it because it's very heady, but there was like this really weird thing that happened in Ford stock around 2001. And it just seemed like something was off, but I just kept really aggressively selling in or buying into this. And when the whole thing was said and done, it was my biggest losing day ever. I want to say it was like $1 million or $500,000 or something like that. And my risk manager afterwards was like, well, what happened? I was like, well, it's this thing. And he goes, oh, yeah, we saw that in this other stock about a year ago. You should have just asked. We would have told you what to do. I was like, oh, God, darn it. So, yeah, that was a regret. That would have been a career-changing scenario, going from, losing $500,000 to maybe making a couple $100,000 instead.
Yeah, that'll leave a mark. See, listeners, everyone has these stories here. I was joking about the Bitcoin. I'm only half joking. I was kind of early on. I'm a bit of a technophile. I was pretty early on with that stuff. And I kind of got off of it. And I remember actually some cop show. It was back in, I don't ever watch cop shows. That's how I remember this. But it had the guy from Lord of the Rings in it. And there was like an android cop partner or something like that. It was back in like 2013. It was supposed to be, it was a while ago, but it was supposed to be this near future show. They're trying to be futuristic. So in that show, I remember the economy had kind of been usurped by Bitcoin. And I remember thinking, wow, these guys think they're pretty avant-garde, but Bitcoin's kind of a fad. It's passé. It's already kind of, people have moved on from that. And that was back in 2013. I was thinking that. And I just never actually picked any of that up. So I was watching, I was aware of it. Then, of course, you get caught up in other trades, other frenzies. Then the big crazy move happens back in, 2017, where it goes, breaks through 1,000 for the first time, all the way up to nearly 20,000 in the futures list. So getting in earlier on that train after watching it, but not actually mining any myself or pulling the trigger on actually buying any is a big one out there. That's probably a good one. But also, I know myself. I know as a trader that I am, I never would have, I'm not a hodler by any means. I trade. And so I would have gotten out of it at some higher level. And I would have been happy with the profit. But, there's always, there's that, I could have made more. So it's a two-sided coin out there. I have a lot of those. You can probably spend a lot of time, obviously, on this one question. It's a deceptively deep question there, Nisa. I could probably regale some stories from the days of the SIBO. The ones that come to mind, ironically enough, are not regrets. They were good ones, which is kind of not in the spirit of the question, but that's what's jumping to mind for me right now. There were two. One was the day when Robert Rubin mysteriously, randomly decided to step down as Treasury Secretary. You recall that day. I was out there in the S. I was a pretty new trader in the S at that time. And I just kind of established my spot. And I was still kind of making my name out there in the back of the pit. And all of a sudden, every broker's phone lights up like it's Christmas, like something's going on. And obviously, that's when you hear that, you're like, uh-oh. And then every broker lifts up their phone, they get their order, and they start yelling out for puts, out of the money puts. They all want them. What are these? How these puts? How these puts? How these puts? Okay, and everyone all of a sudden buy them. Like whatever your offer is, however ridiculous it is, if you made a wide market, they say, we'll just buy them. We'll take them. So they were lifting offers. So everyone in the mother around me, all these very seasoned guys, were stampeding over each other to get to the brokers. And me being kind of new, it kind of just, I had a moment of pause. I was like, this this doesn't seem right. What is going on? And that 1 second of reflection was enough, because you would hit the broker, you'd fill, you'd say, you're filled whatever you want, 100, couple 150, whatever your volume is, to say you're filled. You turn around to your futures clerk, which is how you would hedge it. And you'd say, hey, whatever it is, sell 5 spoos, sell 10 spoos, sell 20, whatever the size you needed to hedge against it, because you wanted to hedge the deltas. You trade delta neutral after all. And so in that split moment, by the time they sold the puts, it said sold, the broker said you're filled, they turned around and arbed to their clerk behind them, hey, sell whatever, 10, 20, whatever. In that time it took to do that, the futures had already started selling off. The spoos had already started selling off. And by the time they sold them and they got an order in, the ARB clerk would then relay that over to the CME where the futures were trading. It was a whole process. It didn't take long. It was set up to be very quickly. In that handful of seconds, that was enough for the spoos to get wiped out. The news had now come out that Rubin had stepped down. Obviously, there was some severe information leakage. And I watched the guys around me, all their faces. I didn't sell any. And all their faces just sunk as one by one they got their fills on their spoos. And they were 15, 20 handles below where they were planning to sell them. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but in the S&P futures, that's an enormous amount. Go look up how big the S&P futures are. And to miss them by more than 10 handles is a ton. That wiped out a lot of guys and a lot of firms in a span of a couple of seconds. And so I initially regretted not selling those. I was like, man, they're lifting through my offer. I should probably be selling these. And then I immediately said, oh, thank God I did not sell. And that wiped out a lot of people. So yeah, that momentary bit of, this doesn't seem right. That little bit of spider sense I had saved me. So maybe not technically the answer to your question. I immediately regretted it. But then in the aftermath, I thought that was actually a great trade. So that's an interesting one. I have to mull over that a little bit more on my best regret. But that's a good question for this holiday themed episode. Good job there, Nisa. So there, for any of you out there who think market makers are this great cabal who move markets and they have this godlike power to destroy your trades, that's a good example of how they get run over by the people who actually know stuff all the time. And it happened there in the big S&P pit. It happened all the time when I was out in other smaller names like Intel and other things like that. So yeah, the notion that these market makers are somehow these, all-knowing, all-powerful creatures who can manipulate the markets at their whim. Usually it's the other way around, but I digress. Mr. Dan, this was a fun holiday-themed episode. Thank you for joining me here today. Before we go, if you want to add anything about your, any of these questions we talked about, have at it. Then B, if folks want to reach out to you, hit you up with more questions, more comments, maybe they want to do some rating, where should they go? What should they do?
Make your way on over to markettaker.com. That's market, like stock market, taker, like take what is rightfully yours, 2 T's in a row, markettaker.com, and hit us up. I'm glad to help with anything I can. That is my dedicated mission in life at this point in my life.
He's a man with a mission. Take him up on it. Markettaker.com is the place to go. And, of course, if you want to check out the pro, head on over to theoptionsinsider.com/pro. And we got a special treat for you folks coming up in, looks like a little over an hour, about an hour and 15 minutes. If you want more live options Q&A, we got it coming at you. The options guy himself will be joining me for a live episode of the Options Playbook Radio Huddle. I love when we get to do these. Holiday time is always a good time to do them. So if you got your questions in, a lot of you have already for OPR, get them in. If you're in the Secret Club, you can start sending them in now. We'll get to them coming up in a little over an hour on Options Playbook Radio. You guys will have that hitting your feed soon. And then, of course, back again next week, another episode of Options Bootcamp. Have a great holiday, everybody.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, Facebook.com/The Options Insider or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.